This is the Almost Daily Zencast. Hello and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Greetings and salutations, new and ongoing listeners. Hello and namaste. Thank you for tuning in. I'm a little distracted and sad by a weird coinkydink. I unintentionally sort of landed on the perfect moment to start the show exactly at 11:11, except that I had previously let the device, let the screen go to sleep and then awoke it again. I had the whole thing all set up with the picture and the words, and I was like, oh my god, that's brilliant, go, record, or go live, and it started to, and then crashed, tragically. And I'm glad there isn't a weird, although it would have been funny and adorable if there was a tiny 2-second episode of silence or of me just blah, and then right at 11:11. But it doesn't matter because it wouldn't have shown up really in any meaningful way. So that's how I started off the show today. Hello and welcome, one and all. Today is in fact a weird, interesting day. 1202221. That's the date. Curiously, no weird, wild, world-ending prophecies were made, which I always find curious and suspect, and I'll get into why in a second. But there's so much prophecy in the world, right? And I'm not being judgy. I have my personal, rather nuanced opinion on prophecy et al. as a cluster of different events and things and ideas and discussion points. But I'm definitely not the kind of person that just mocks and ridicules people for believing in them or for having experienced something that felt prophetic, etc. The world is weird and wild and magical in ways that we hitherto have not bothered to remember how to understand, I assure you. And synchronicities and synergies and yes, indeed, even coincidences do happen. I really don't understand all those on the coincidences aren't real camp. I do understand the seductiveness of the I think it's cynical, but the philosophical question and or logic that there are no such thing as coincidences. But I think it gets abused. And also, I think there are such things as coincidences. I think that the universe works in magical, coincidental, energy, frequency, patterns aligning kind of way. And how else can you describe a coincidence but a mysterious and difficult to perceive alignment of patterns? But I digress. The reason I call out this palindrome ambigram day, which we neither celebrate or had any kind of anticipatory expectation for, except for the super math nerds. I had a friend, and this is a vague memory that's coming to me in the moment, and it may be wistfully sort of not very accurate, but I know that I had an acquaintance at some point in school that was super into, not numerology, no disrespect to that camp, but the coincidence of mathematical phenomena of palindromic numbers, and this other one. I don't recall ever having officially heard of this, but I understand what it means because I know a thing or two about language. Ambigrams. Words matter, folks. Also, sentence structure matters. I'll put a pin in that. That's a really random thought from a whole different conversation. The reason I call out this date is because numbers aren't just numbers, right? They are a strange and bizarre magical thing in the universe, and I don't use the word magical lightly. And my reasoning, or the foundation for that statement, comes from the following reality. And I say reality because I think it's more than a fact. It's more than a fundamental truth. I think it's an architectural, undeniable, undebunkable feature, to use the technical term, of how reality operates. And that's that reality is fractal in its architecture, in its nature, in its form, in its function, in its unfolding. Now, for some people, that might be a really abstract and obtuse and sort of meaningless thing to say. And forgive me as I sip my tea. And for other people, that might be a very specific thing to say. And let us not judge one another one way or the other. Let's unpack it together, dear friends. And I would like to interject here quickly that I'm not a big fan of isms, but because we often just blur the use of things to mean multiple things, I can't get away from using such words as fractalism. And I don't mean a dogmatic, prescribed, authoritarian, as in some other kind of ism, like a corporatism or a oligarchism or a totalitarianism, right? I don't mean that. But I mean that a system of understanding that is grounded in the factual knowledge of fractal geometry. Now, why would a mathematical system or language or subset of math be fundamental to the universe? As some, of the founding fathers of science and art and philosophy have pointed out in various ways, we can deduce from observation. We can come to the understanding through phenomenological experience that what we call math, our language, our visual depiction, are symbols that point to phenomena in the universe that are measurable, repeatable, and clearly fundamental to the way things work. And that any of our human expressions in terms of schools of thought or philosophies or rules or laws, quote unquote, expressed by any given human individual are not literally the act themselves or the phenomena itself. The phenomena in the universe is not caused by Newton describing it, in other words, but it is reflected. It is presented and made available to the contemplation of the logical part of our human minds through the language chosen by said individuals. So the fathers of science, whatever pros or cons you may want to argue about, arguably, sorry for the use of a contradictory use of that very similar set of terms there. Setting aside whatever you want to debate, discuss, fight about, arguably, the most genuine expressions of real, verifiable, scientific discovery, to not fall into the trap of using such loaded terms as scientific fact, which has a long history of debate, which we won't get into now. Put a pin in it. I think I've gone on a sidebar about it somewhere in the show. But we might want to come back and do a whole show on, just an episode on the history of the term scientific fact, which, has its flaws and problematic issues. But I digress. Scientific discovery. Let's keep that as a clean term. To discover something scientifically. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who've got a lot of beef with science. I'm not one of them. Judge me as you might, but don't bring your hate. I do believe that there are many things that we cram into the label, and that's a common problem with language. I was just having a conversation with a social media acquaintance on the internet about bliss and how we use the word bliss to describe many different phenomena, and we don't disambiguate. We sometimes we do by adding other words around the word bliss, but like snow in English, as opposed to Eskimo Aleut languages, right? Like they have, in Alaska, the indigenous people there use many words for snow because experientially, phenomenologically, they have encountered, experienced, and engaged with, and built an understanding about many different forms of snow. We just call it snow. And maybe we got sleet and hail. But the difference is not only fascinating, there's some insight there in terms of the form and function of language and its limitations. The words are not actually the thing. And the images and ideas that the words evoke in individuals' minds are not actually the thing. Those are all, one could say from a certain perspective, fractal recursions re-representing the thing. So I digress. Do I think there's any wild, crazy meaning about this date? I don't know. I sure as heck, I'm not pretending to have had some weird insight or anticipatory foreknowledge about anything special about this date. I am surprised I didn't see from the corners of the spirituality inclined on the social media trending bits. I didn't see any memes about this a couple days ago. I have yet to see any memes about it today, except for the one that I did see, which is straightforwardly just what the facts of the matter. It's the date written in a particularly digital computer calculator font, and the explanation of what a palindrome and an ambigram is. And I'll quote to you this anonymous meme. Today's date is both a palindrome and an ambigram. You can read it from left to right or right to left, as well as upside down. So does that have any meaning? I don't know. Would I have had in an alternate universe, perhaps a fictional universe, in which I was writing this story about myself several years ago, anticipated and proclaimed that this would be some sort of meaningful day? Sure. Because that kind of stuff is fun. But there is the simple reality that sometimes a rock is just a rock. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, as Freud put it. And sometimes a palindrome anagram is just a palindrome anagram, and there's no other thing. Would it be awesome, in my personal opinion, if today was a true day, like a real day of some lost, buried, forgotten, algorithmic prophecy of, let us say, something amazing and magical, akin to a healing evolutionary step towards the human species achieving third eye opening, transcendental enlightenment and transformation into crystalline beings of energetic conscious frequency? Yeah. Yes, vote for that. Cha-ching. Plenty of people, and I mean this anonymously, as always, folks, for those of you who are new to the show and don't know, I'm here to discuss the ideas that I encounter as I cast my random, nets of awareness out into the interwebs in various places in various ways, not to troll individuals or judge or castigate people for propagating ideas. I have no truck with any of that nonsense in all earnestness. Although, obviously, because I present sometimes confrontational questions, questions that may seem a bit contradictory or contrary, and observations that may not support some of the ideas that I am assessing, people might interpret incorrectly that I am judging or castigating or being rude, and I truly never genuinely intend to be any of those things. I ask because public discourse matters, and creative, imaginative exploration of ideas also matters. So let's take a cleansing the palate musical break, where I encourage you to just sit with some of these thoughts in your mind for a hot second. and enjoy the knowledge that music itself is fractal in nature. As you listen to some of these bells and whistles of electronic robot dance music, crafted lovingly by ours truly, the fictional literary character known as DJZ. Please enjoy a jazz hop groove pad audio entertainment track entitled by DJZ Revisiting Familiar Grooves from the hitherto unnamed album. Fractals, man. They're everywhere. Now, the idea that fractals are everywhere or are everything is not an article of faith. It is not a dictate or a mandate you must adhere to. It is not a talking point or belief structure that you must accept and integrate into your mind. It is a measurable, undeniable form, function, architecture, feature of reality. Your genome is a fractal. The structure of the galaxy is fractal in its organization. The pathways of the neurons in your brain are fractal in their construction. Fractals, they're everywhere, man. Thank you, DJ Zed, for that delightful bit of accompanying music. Programming note, before we move on and talk about fractals some more in greater detail. I received an email late last night, which I blurrily didn't read very clearly, but which I have reviewed this morning in anticipation of this show. And the beloved Sprecher.com has, as is their corporate right, updated and refined and changed their terms of service. In actually a laudable, applaudable, honorable attempt, I think, to keep their platform specific and clear of problematic content, etc., but not in a that immediately opens the door for people to jump to the conclusion that we're talking about. What's the word? What's the thing they're saying, accusing everybody of? Censorship. No. They wanted, in this update, to make sure that creators on their platform are aware of the rules regarding the use of prohibited content, specifically unlicensed music. And to sort of emphasize that and make make their stance very clean. The new bit, which they want to make sure people like myself are aware of, is that users may not, and I'm quoting, users may not use Sprecher with music-only content, such as music tracks or DJ mixes. Sprecher is not intended to be a music hosting service. And that makes perfect sense. Now, ironically, curiously, and unfortunately for this humble audio entertainment word performance artist / pretend radio disc jockey, there may be an episode or a dozen in the long history of the show, especially from back when this was not specifically called out in the EULA or the TOU, for I have indeed read through them, dear friends. There may very well be some episodes which I could be accused of being guilty of doing that. And I need to go back. They're very clear, and I wanted to highlight this bit because it was in some ways inspiring, despite the fact that I really got to go spend some serious amount of time going back through my entire 5-year backlog of episodes on Sprecher.com, which I humbly encourage and invite you to come on down and check out, friends. There are some episodes that are indeed either live audio recordings from when I was collaborating with the talented musical phenom. I'm an asshole. I just totally blanked on my friend's band's name, and I need to go to their Instagram page and be like, what the hell? I need to find their thing. Gazuda. Oh my god, I am so sorry. My brain was looking at the picture from the Instagram and would not call up the name. I was just staring at that cartoon doodle. But that's a whole long story as to why I'm into the cartoon stuff that they do. But Gazuda Music, forgive me if any of you guys are listening. That was not intentional. That was just brain fart o'clock. So there's some recordings of that. There's some recordings from when I first started collaborating with the literary fictional character of my own creation known as DJ Zed, that may be mostly just music. And there's been a couple times that I've hosted underground dance parties in which I did a fair amount of like half-ass attempt at some sort of, thought-provoking, I won't even call it word poetry, but just like talking through the songs. But they are very specific that creators should create content that is exclusively in spoken format and use music as a way to enrich your spoken format podcast, which I think 90% of my episodes, that's the way it is. Even though I do sort of pretend like I'm a radio, I should just drop that pretense and just play some music and do the thing I just did now and drop some more thoughts in as the music is playing. The other bit is, as always, please mind owning appropriate licenses for intellectual properties. And check that box all the way down the list. I assure you, dear audience, every bit of music that has ever been on the show was either created by myself using applications which grant me the right to use the music as intended, as I've used it, and attribute it to my fictional character, which I've created, which I own the intellectual rights to, DJ Zed. And or collaborations with people that gave me the consent to use the music on the podcast, such as Gazuda. And there's one tiny sliver of, like, the stuff that's on the intro and outro to stuff, and some early episodes I played some songs kind of solo, or talked along with them, or discussed them, reviewed them, as it were, which is, I think, also within the clause of like things how you can do music on this platform. Were from freemusicarchive.org, which I strongly encourage other content creators to go check out, because you can search for music that is hosted there by artists, musicians, and creators that want you to use their music. And they have various, free licensing agreements and even pay licensing agreements now, I believe, since the last big update. I have not been there in forever, which I should go visit and find some new artists to incorporate into the show. But so yeah, that's the programming note. I've got to go back and do some cleanup work. And a hard choice this creator's got to decide is, do I replace those episodes with new offline created episodes that I record and then upload into the holding spot from back in that day? Or do I just spare myself that extra level of work? What would I talk about? I don't know. I struggle every day to really... This show is real, raw, and radically unscripted, folks. No one gives me talking points to talk about. This is me bearing to you, dear audience, my true, humblest, sincerest thoughts from the deep, deep core of my being. Absurd or ridiculous or as unimportant as some of them may be. But I digress. I hope to decide that soon, because I might just delete all the episodes that are not in conformity with this update, and then just move boldly forward. Or I might do the extra crazy amount of. It takes like 5 hours to do a produced, for 1 hour of listen to, if you're doing it really good and really hardcore, which I would want to do. And it's an idea I've been thinking about for a long time anyways, as really old-time veteran hardcore listeners probably recall. And I've never really quite... In fact, I've got a couple of draft episodes from various attempts to create a really intensely produced episode. One idea that I was tinkering with was having conversations with myself, multiple iterances of myself, to talk about fractalism. And there we go. We bring it back full circle to today's topic. So, having said everything I've already said about fractals, and thank you for indulging me in that sidebar about programming. Stay tuned. Having said what I've said about fractals today, I want to share further thoughts and extensions of ideas that I've come across and merged from various sources throughout my lifetime's curiosity with such big questions as life, the universe, and everything. The very nature of reality. If you look deep into ancient spiritual art, especially, if you look into ancient spiritual art from cultures around the world, you may discover, as other authors and documentarians have pointed out, that visual depiction of sometimes highly mathematically accurate, precise, fractal structures is often deeply incorporated into the depictions of the spiritual realms or of divine beings. Sometimes in very simplistic ways, sometimes in really highly complex and sophisticated ways. So, that's one thing, one interconnectedness, right? Now, flash forward to post-Mandelbrot mathematics and the intersection of various theoretical analyses about reality, right? From the founding fathers of physics to some of the cutting-edge quantum mechanical physics, etc., we come to a liminal space, now being commonly referred to in our pop culture thanks to the MCU. Put a pin in that, because in my sub-segment media review series, which some of you may be familiar with, Mr. Zeppo's Totally Irrelevant Media Reviews, I will be coming back to talk in depth about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its many phases and its many titles. And one of the themes there is their comic book, movie, fictional references and uses of the fractal zone, or the what Planck would have called sub-Planck. There's Planck length, and that's a profound definition of a mathematical understanding that if you look deeply into the smallest of scales, you reach a sort of liminal boundary in terms of how math can describe what math can accurately describe about reality and how it functions. Frequency becomes this big catch-all term here in this liminal space, and the significance, I think, if you kind of zoom back out from that tiny and very mind-numbing place, is that frequency, being fundamental to the existence of everything, must therefore carry information at that subatomic, sub-Planck length place, akin to, in perhaps an inverse opposite, or in some sort of proportional relationship to its scale and size that I'm not aware enough of the nature of to describe yet, but akin to, in some way similar to, like quantum entanglement, which is a similar but separate thing from what I'm trying to describe. Black holes, right? Zoom over to black holes. We were just focusing on Planck length and whatever might be smaller than that. In which point we find that, like, fractal frequencies of vibrating who knows what, nothingness, some sort of emanation from a raw source that we have yet found a way to measure or describe accurately in science and mathematics, to the largest, one of the largest things that we can conceive of in the universe, that we think we have rational capacity to scientifically describe and measure against and test this model of. Because remember, everything, the math and the language and the words we use, they're models. The ideas that we develop around them, models, not the actual thing. But they're our best way to point to those things and try to approach comprehension. Black holes are these mysterious things that I don't know about you, but as a science fiction nerd and a science nerd and a nerd in general, we've had a lifelong sort of romance with, in terms of our understanding and developing our comprehension of, as a pretty fundamentally huge phenomena that we knew very little about and still struggle to understand, that is clearly turned out to be, proven itself to be highly integrated into the universe, into the reality we find ourselves in. And that's that the event horizon, I would argue, right? And I think some scientists have said this, and I can't remember who, but I know that there's lots of discussion and debate about how it operates. But synthesizing for myself the various things I've come to understand through reading about it and watching documentaries and whatnot, it seems to be another liminal boundary, in which matter, as opposed to stripping away down to the smallest things to where you can't find anything else to break open, right? Because that's how we got there as an analogy. We broke open the apple and found the seed. We split open the seed and found that there's material there that can be split open to find components within, which can be split open to find other components, and we gave them all names. And we got down to Planck length and said, what? Whoa. it seems that everything that exists and is made up of matter, at the smallest scale and the largest scale, has a relationship with frequency and information. Right? As some of the reports about black holes will describe, the matter approaches the event horizon, and then because of the compression and of the physics of it, which are difficult to describe in English, matter gets split open and reduced to its most fundamental components and returned to a state of being information, which apparently either goes somewhere or is retained or can be spat back out and converted back into energy. Because as it would seem, in terms of the reality we can observe, nothing can truly be destroyed. It just gets transformed. If we couple all of those disparate pieces together in a jigsaw puzzle that merges ancient spiritual wisdoms, mind, body, consciousness, awareness practices, and various observations from the realms of science, both, in terms of the smallest and the largest and everything in between, and the things we can't even see, of which we know, we must acknowledge and realize the pie chart of things we know and can know and don't know and don't know we don't know. The sliver of knowledge is itty bitty, and the slivers of not knowing are huge. But all we can do is set that aside and aspire to achieve greater understanding. But you puzzle piece these various ingredients together, and in my humble opinion, after a year of contemplating it and questioning it and investigating it, and to the best of my ability, exploring it in reality, you come to an understanding I humbly invite you to contemplate, not blindly take on or adhere to, and go test for yourself, that the totality of everything we might call reality can and ought to be described as a living, holographic, fractal consciousness emanation from singularity into the multiplicity, the multiversity, if I can coin a new term, of all possible or probable outcomes, events, beings, phenomena that could, might exist, and that's like a breathing inhale and exhale of epic proportions, constantly foaming and frothing into an infinity, a fractal, an infinite fractal of phenomenological experience, which you and I are currently one cellular component, which within resides the same recursion, because we are a form and function of reality, right? We're not an object. We are a form and function of reality that appears object-like and person-like. We are more than just this ambulatory meat sack of blood and bone that can ramble on about whatever nonsensical idea that pops into its head. And that this fractal architecture is mind-blowing, mind-numbing, but also highly informative when you sit with it and contemplate it and develop a deep interpersonal comprehension and or even, dare I say, communion with it. Because if we were to package everything into the label the fractal, all caps, divine fractal, to give it the regal majesty it deserves, the divine fractal et al., the totality of everything that could be described as the living holographic fractal entity that is the infinite multiverse of infinite universes along all axes of manifestation. It is that which is I am, in quotes. I'm not calling myself the universe. I'm saying the universe is everyone. The universe is you. The universe is I am. I am is the universe. From a fractal perspective, we can sort of zoom in and out of from our own individual hyper-isolated perspective as the one me, this personality, and connect to, both theoretically and I think in a tangible, meaningful, practical way, with our fellow cosmic phenomena, with each other, as it were, with one another. And this, dear friends, I would argue, might very well be the most powerful thing the human species could strive to achieve. If the human species is an entity that operates as a fractal, then it should therefore, I think, be meaningful for all of us to strive to understand that, right? Not to believe, put a pin in that. I don't mean to disparage belief structures necessarily. But as you'll encounter, I've gone off on many a sidebar on episodes that are not specifically focused on belief as a subject in their title. And also have done an episode or two specifically on belief. So put a big red pin in the imaginary corkboard in the shared environment in our imaginations that we create while we sit here together and contemplate these things. The world is strife with conflict, right? The world is a dumpster fire of suffering and chaos, and, let us not forget, also a cornucopia of bliss and joyous experience. It's the contrast between the two that creates both our greatest euphoria and our deepest suffering. If we limit ourselves perpetually, if we perpetuate as a species this boundary box that we draw around ourselves as individuals, I think we give up, we abdicate, which is a word I usually use in a positive sense, but here I would say it would be lamentable, to give up access to any and all possible tools, spiritual experiences, phenomenological, emotional, spiritual, physical, intellectual healing that may be available to us as a human species. If we invest in that communion with the divine fractal, if we invest collectively in the investigation, right? Let me pause here for a second and assure you, friends, as I've said before, and I'm sure I'll be bound to say again on this show and whatever other content I create. I fully, completely acknowledge and understand that I may be totally, crazily wrong about all of this. It would be a massive blow. It would be a great tragedy to me if I were. And I question that concern. I question that issue. I don't rage on in my own blind faith adherence to some thing that I picked up by blind faith. I share with you these thoughts because even though I've struggled repeatedly and questioned repeatedly and asked myself, am I totally dead wrong about all of this? And pursued the clarity on that issue many a time and doubted many a time. I have always returned through both rational questioning and seeking of deeper understanding, and through direct phenomenological experience vis-a-vis, my tinkering around with experimenting and exploring spiritual practices. I keep returning to the undeniability of it. That it once you really take a good look at all the evidence, both theoretical and practical, doubt may rage on occasionally and rear its ugly head, but that's its job at one level, and that's its red flag of help me, I need healing. In one way or another, about how we as individuals and as a collective operate. I assert to you, dear audience, that I am not in any way, shape, or form attempting to mislead anyone. I'm sharing with you my genuine and authentic thoughts, wrapped up in a fanciful attempt to be entertaining by invoking some frivolous fringe forms of literary fiction, in part because I want this all to cross over to the books that I am writing, which are overtly fantasy fiction, right? But I assure you, when it comes to the subject we've just engaged a discussion in, I'm not shooting bullshit blanks. I assert to you that as challenging and as difficult and maybe as crazy as it may sound to anyone that has not encountered this line of reasoning or this theoretical notion before, that if you explore it and investigate it and attempt to measure it for yourself, and I say that in the pseudo home scientific sense of practice the practice, meditate, do the yoga, find the practices that connect you to your inner self. They are many and varied, and I know lots of people are very frustrated with meditation because they've tried it and it's difficult. There's a million forms of meditation, and as Alan Watts points out, almost any activity, whether originally designed by a meditator or not, doing your laundry, can be done in a contemplative, meditative fashion. I, as you may have already noticed, have a lot to say about those kinds of things. And I share this with the world, not because I think we should build a religion around it and create a system of ideological enforcement of these ideas, but rather because I'm just here to share my enthusiasm and interest in the subjects as they relate to my own lived experience. And I deeply, deeply thank you, as always, folks, for tuning in. I encourage you to go and read up. If you've never heard of Terence McKenna, go check out Terence McKenna. If you've never heard of Alan Watts, go check out Alan Watts. If you've never heard of Lars Moll and his mind-bogglingly interesting and very tiny book, The Law of Light, go check that out. No one's paying me to say those things. Those are just off the top of my head. Because people are always like, sources, give me your references. There you go. Boom, boom, boom. Not even the totality. Just off the top of my head, books that approach some of the ingredients of my theory from their own perspective and talk about them, and have helped me in my journey of trying to commune with and understand and align with the living, holographic, divine mind, consciousness, fractal energy being that is the infinite and impossible to describe multiverse, giving birth to life. Why is that important? Why does that matter? If that is true, if all of that is true, which I acknowledge I could be wrong. I know, and it's a frightening gap of insecurity there for anyone contemplating something this intense. But if those things are not wrong, if the words I have been saying are vaguely indicating something in the right direction, and even if they're failing to completely and 100% accurately describe it, then there's deep, like profoundly deep implications for the mundane horrors of the world we find ourselves in here in this particular iteration of life on Mother Earth. And it might very well represent a path to explore, to tread, to boldly rediscover, as Buddha points out in an attributed quote, that he did not invent the path. He merely rediscovered it, and it had been trodden by 1,000 generations before, or I think he said by several Buddhas before. I forget the wording. And that path, that exploration of transformative, transcendental practice, which would lead to a cumulative, species-wide, evolutionary, transformational healing, would do ever so much more to right the wrongs, heal the pains, end the sufferings, and transmute the horrors of this crazy dumpster fire world we find ourselves in, more than any political ideology I've yet to encounter. And that, dear friends, is my humble opinion I share with you on this podcast. Along with a bunch of other crazy, kooky things, which I like to explore, because why not? We are both things at once. We are here to live life, not destroy it. We are here to enjoy the world and worlds, plural, that we create, not deprive ourselves of them. And we are here to, manifest something. I think I don't even want to add any more descriptive words there. We're here to manifest something, and it sure as heck can be something a hell of a lot groovier, if I may impose an archaic term, than what we're manifesting now. Put a pin in that whole idea, because I've talked a bit about that before, and I'm sure we'll come back to talk a bit about it again. For now, dear friends, I thank you humbly, and I invite you to enjoy a bit of DJ Zed's robot dance music. Well, actually, this is more of a cinematic, environmental music, orchestral trap remix live, sequencing the fundamentals once more as we talk our way out to the end of this episode. Today's episode is brought to you by the number 120222021. Happy palindrome ambigram day. The Almost Daily Zencast, hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, is an independent production created by the fictional production studio C-Tag Studios that exists entirely in my mind. All ideas, thoughts, anecdotes, perspectives, allegories, references to other material are my own attempt to synthesize a meta-theory of what the F is actually going on here. It is brought to you undiluted by any other corporate or corruptive influences. I assure you, my friends, no one but you, dear audience, is contributing to my financial well-being. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for putting up with the ads. If you'd like to support this show and the other cornucopia of content that this obscure internet content creator is pumping out into the world, please, oh please, drop on by to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your hearts, friends. Namaste.